artists whose careers fell off a cliff commercially. Now, this has long interested me. Two of the first bands that I was ever into when I was growing up were the Motors and Squeeze, and both of them had very checkered careers in terms of chart placings. The Motors broke my heart because they had two quite big hit singles and then their career just completely went off a cliff. Squeeze were a bit different because they never really had huge commercial success apart from a couple of singles. They had sort of reasonable success, but their career was very fitful and they never really seemed to have the success that I wanted them to have. I wouldn't describe their career as having fallen off a cliff. So the artists I'm going to show today are ones where it's fairly noticeable that there was this, maybe an initial rush of success or even maybe a prolonged bout of success, and then it just basically just kind of nosedived. So now, what I've tried to do, and it's not exact because my maths is not great, I've tried to sort of rank them or order them. So we'll finish with the artist who had the longest run of records without any chart success whatsoever. It's a bit unfair really, because the artists who tend to be very prolific end up at the top of their heap in a way, because they just keep releasing records long after most people have stopped buying them, and they're just down to the fan base. So the final artist in the pile is a really great artist actually, and he definitely did not deserve to have his career go off a cliff in quite that way. So just before I go through the records I've got to show, I'm only showing artists where I actually have a record by them in the collection. The artist that you're probably screaming out at the screen as I'm doing the introduction is Nick Kershaw, who is really famous for having had this really amazing burst of success in the probably early 80s, wasn't it? He was Flavour of the Month, and then his career just went off a cliff completely. He still managed to carve a career for himself. I saw him actually live last year at the Shrewsbury Retro 80s Festival, and he was really good. He got a great reception, but in terms of chart placings, he definitely died a death. But I have no Nick Kershaw in my collection, so I'm not going to include him. Right, so after that rather long preamble, let's make a start. So the first artist I'm going to talk about is a band who had some good success when they first burst on the scene in the late 1970s. They had some good chart placings, and then for some reason it just sort of came to an end for them. So I'm talking about the Boomtown Rats, Bob Geldof's band, the band that he rose to fame with. So they started their debut album in 1977, got to number 18 in the UK, quite a big hit. Then they had their biggest album, which was Tonic for the Troops in 1978, which got to number 8 in the charts. That was a really big hit album. The Fine Art of Surfacing dipped a bit, number 11 in 79. Then this was the fourth album. I'm showing this one because this is really the last one that had any significant chart action. I'm not sure the date of this, early 80s I think, wasn't it? 1980. Got to number 24 in the UK and got to number 81 in the US. They never really had big success in the States, but after this record, the next album they released was called V Deep. Is it Very Deep or V Deep? I put V Deep here. I'm not sure if I'd shorten that. Got nowhere in the charts. Didn't get anywhere in the charts in the UK. Literally just went nowhere. 82 in the US. Then they had an album called In the Long Grass, which again just got nowhere. And then Citizens of Boomtown, which was 2020, again, got nowhere. So Mondo Bongo was the last really significant album that they had. And that was back in 1981, number 24 in the charts. So it's quite interesting, the next album from there just literally didn't chart at all. I'm going to hazard a guess that it was something to do with Bob Geldof and Live Aid. Maybe he just sort of overexposed himself and he was no longer seen as being a kind of viable artistic entity. I'm not entirely sure, but, he did some good solo albums and they've made a comeback in recent times, the Boomtown Rats, and they were a good band back in the day. Their records are really undervalued now. You often find them in charity shops, sat next to the Christa Bergs and the Lena Martells. It's very strange. I don't know why. Anyway. So there we go, Boomtown Rats, the Boomtown Rats is the first one. And the second one is a very different artist, not a band but an artist. This is a female artist who came onto the scene in the mid-1980s and got off to a pretty good start. Her first album, which is not this one, her first album was the self-titled album, Suzanne Vega, which got to number 11 in the UK, 91 in the States. So she came out of the gate running in the UK. Her second record, Solitude Standing, in 1987, was quite a big hit album, got to number 2 in the UK, 11 stateside. This one, Days of Open Hand, her third record, which is a really fine album actually, in 1990. Again, did pretty well, got to number 7 in the UK, number 50 in the US. So again, she's riding high in the UK, but not so much in her homeland. Then in 1992, she has the album 99.9 Fahrenheit, which I don't have on vinyl. That got to number 20. Then it starts to slip. 9 Objects of Desire got to number 43. Songs in Red and Grey, now this is where she falls off a cliff, got to number 100 in the UK and 178 in the US. Beauty and Crime in 2007, 127, 129 UK, US. So she's completely lost in the wilderness at this point. Then she has a slight blip. She has an album called Tales from the Realm of the Queen of Pentacles, which is in more recent times. That actually got to number 37 in the UK, so not too bad. Then she did 2 albums after that, one of which in 2016 literally charted nowhere. If you look on if you look on Wikipedia, it's just an empty line across every single territory. I should just say I'm really only looking at the UK and the US in this video, and there are some artists who managed to cling on in certain European territories, maybe Germany or Holland, but there's an example. Suzanne Vega had an album in 2016 which literally charted nowhere at all. So she's still shredding the boards, she still plays live, she still records, but as far as commercial success goes, yeah, it didn't go so well after 1992. That was when it all kind of went wrong. So yeah, there we go. That is Suzanne Vega. Now, the next one, sort of quite similar in a way. In fact, this artist did say that she was influenced by Suzanne Vega. So it's another female artist, this time British. And she came on the scene in, I'm going to say, the mid to late 1980s. Sort of late 80s, actually. Her first album was a big hit album in the UK. And it's Tanita Tikaram, whose record Ancient Heart, which is one of the really finest British debut albums, I'd say, of all time. Quite sort of melancholy, sultry singing, tasteful arrangements, really nice songs, really good songwriter. So she burst onto the scene in the UK with that hit single, Twisting My Sobriety, which was a really big hit record. And the album got to number 3 in the UK. It was a really big hit album in 1988. Then she did The Sweet Keeper in 1990, which got to number 3 in the UK. Everybody's Angel in 1991, which got to number 19, so she slipped then. And then the next album was a complete disaster. 11 Kinds of Loneliness in 95, literally charted nowhere. Didn't chart at all. The Cappuccino Songs in 1998 scraped to number 69 in the UK. Her album Sentimental in 2005 didn't chart in the UK or the US, and then there was another album after that, which got to 147. The next one, Closer to the People, didn't chart, and then her last album actually, which I'm not sure when that came out, not all that long ago, got to number 92 in the UK. Again, she's plugged on, she's still there, she's still releasing records, and she still has a fan following. Richard McCook here on the vinyl community is a big fan. I think he's done an album ranking video on her, I think. So check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, Tanita Tikaram, she was Flavour of the Month quite briefly, managed to sustain it for a little while, and then the public just lost interest. So it's a cruel world out there. Right, so the next artist, again, is a British singer-songwriter who briefly rose to fame with a really successful pop group who had some good hit success, and then for some reason they sacked him. I'm not entirely sure why, but they sacked him. And then after that, I don't think they had too much success after that themselves. He launched a solo career, which was actually quite successful. The first record that he made, this is Nick Heyward from Haircut 100. He released this record, North of a Miracle, in 1982, and it was a big hit album, and it's a really fine album actually. It's really good. If you like Pelican West, that classic first Haircut 100 record, it's worth trying to find this album. You'll find it dead cheap in the UK, at least in charity shops. I found this in Oxfam for about £1. But this got to number 2 in the UK when it came out in 1982. Then he followed it up in 1983, so the year after, he made an album called North of a Miracle, and that got to number 10, so he slipped a little bit, but he was still kind of, in the running. Then he made 8 more albums between the years 1986 and 2017, only 2 of which charted. So there was Tangled in 1995, which got to number 93. So you say, charted officially, but it's a pretty low number, that, isn't it? And then Woodland Echoes in 2017, again scraped into the very, very lower reaches of the charts, just scraping into the top 100. So what happened with Nick Heyward? Good-looking lad, really good singer, really great songwriter. I saw him play. Him and his band supported Squeeze in, I think it was 1995. They had a good album out at the time, the one with the egg and bacon breakfast on the cover. I forget the name of it. I got it on CD. A good album. As I said, good band, good songwriter. Who knows why these things happen, but he was Flavour of the Month quite briefly, and then, fell off a cliff. So, what a shame. He's still doing the rounds, of course. Right, next one. An artist who was a pretty major artist for a while, and I think this one is quite surprising in a way, given how big he was. He was kind of up there when he first burst on the scene. In fact, I've got 2 artists here, actually, who were quite big at the same time as Elvis Costello and were comparable with him in some ways. And then, just after a certain point, the public just switched off. So I'm talking about Joe Jackson. And, of course, this is his classic album, Night and Day, which was his, his 5th album. His first album, Look Sharp, in 1979, what's number 40 in the UK, number 20 in the US. And of course, he was this kind of edgy singer-songwriter, as I said, a bit like Costello, sort of attitudey, quite sarcastic, great sort of pin-sharp, new wave sound, really. And he did really well for a while. He did an album called I'm the Man in 1979, which is obviously a classic. Got to number 12 in the UK, 22 US. Beat Crazy in 1980, got to 42 and 41 in the UK and US respectively. Then he did a surprisingly successful record in 81, Joe Jackson's Jumpin' Jive, which is essentially a big band album, and you wouldn't think that would do too well, but it actually did really well in the UK, got to number 14. Night and Day, which is his real classic album, which contains the absolutely monster hit single Stepping Out, which is one of my favourite British singles of all time. Got to number 3 in the UK and 4 in the US. Obviously, this is the record that made him a household name, really. And then he surprisingly then dipped. He did Body and Soul in 84, which got to 14 in the UK and 20 in the US. And you're thinking, okay. And then the next album, which, to be fair, was a classical experimental record, Willpower, in 87, just didn't chart at all in the UK. Got to number 131 in the US. And then after that, it's just really diminishing returns. Blaze of Glory in 89 got to 36, 61. Laughter and Lust in 91 got to 41, 116. So he's not off a cliff, but he's definitely heading downwards. Then a disastrous album, Night Music, in 1994, didn't chart in the UK or the US at all. And then since then, Joe Jackson has released 9 albums, the latest one being What a Racket in 2023. And there's been minimal chart action for any of those. We're talking like hardly anything, hardly any chart action anywhere. But he does okay in Holland still. So plaudits to the Dutch for still holding on to Joe Jackson. And yet he's one of those artists. He could probably still sell out the Albert Hall if he was to do a British date. There's still a lot of affection for him. And those big hits he had back in the day will carry him through, in a live arena. But nobody buys his records anymore. So yeah, there we go. Joe Jackson. Who would have thunk it? Okay, so the next one, we're nearly at the end here. So the next one is quite a dramatic one, and things went wrong for this guy. I can't quite remember why. I think he had personal issues and things going on in his career. Was it a change of name, maybe? I can't quite remember. Terence Trent D'Arby, whose first album made a massive impact in the UK. One of those records that ended up in the record collections of everybody, even people who only bought one record a year. It was this one. Came out in 1987. It was a number 1 hit album in the UK and got to number 4 in the US as well. So he probably made his money off this and never needed to work again. A great album, a real sort of, landmark in pop music, really. Just a really, really fine record. And the next record, you'd think it would have been a complete flop because you find this record in charity shops. I got this one, I think, for 50p or £1 about 10 years ago in Bernardo's. The second record, Neither Fish Nor Flesh, from 89. In the UK, didn't do too badly, got to number 12 in the UK, only 61 in the US. So he slipped from number 4 in the US down to number 61 in the US with his second album. And this is a classic, really classic, obscure sort of R&B pop album. It's a really interesting record. It's one I do need to look at some point. It's got some really interesting songs on it. And I think it definitely deserved to make more of an impression. If you compare it to the first album, maybe it's not as commercial, but it's a really interesting record with some really interesting material. And it wasn't a big disaster, as I said, in the UK. Got to number 12. Then he did an album called Symphony or Damn in 93, which again was not bad. UK number 8, 119 in the US, so his career is basically finished in the US. Vibrator in 95, got to number 11 in the UK, so he's still hanging on, 178 in the US. Then another 9 albums that literally had no chart action of any kind anywhere in any territory between 2001 and 2001 and 2021. So he's done 9 albums in that time, and none of them seem to have charted anywhere. Not the US, not the UK, not even in Holland. Nowhere. Just no chart action at all. So there we go. Terence, Trent, D'Arby, one of those artists that got away in a parallel universe. Maybe he was another Prince, but that was not to happen. So there we go. Check this album out. If you ever see that in a charity shop going cheap, which you probably will, pick it up. Okay, we've got 2 more. Now the next one, I suppose, is a bit like Nick Kershaw in a way, just in terms of the sort of music it was. Can you guess who it is? It's Heyward Jones, of course. A big pop star in the sort of the last part of the early 80s, really. 1984, this was his first album, Humans Live, a number 1 album in the UK, and it's a fine album, you know, it's got some good stuff on it. When you listen to it now, it does conjure up that era, really, that sort of innocent era of you know, blonde highlights and mullets and just, I don't know, just very 1980s, isn't it? Just quintessentially. So yeah, number 1 album, he comes roaring out of the gate with this in 1984. His next album doesn't do too badly. Dream Into Action gets to number 2 in the UK and 10 in the US. And he's still clinging on in 86. He makes an album called 1 to 1, which is number 10 UK. 59 in the US, not quite so good. And then across that line in 89, he's kind of off the cliff there, really. 64 in the UK, 65 in the US. And then he does another 13 albums until 2025 with 0 chart action. Again, just absolutely nothing. Apart from there's just one freak showing in 2019. He does a record called Transform, which gets to number 49 in the UK. So for some reason that record was a blip again. But apart from that, complete commercial wilderness. But again, he has his fans. I would imagine he's kind of on that 80s circuit, you know, the one that I saw Nick Kershaw on. I would imagine he's still got a big fan following out there, but yeah, he stopped selling, so there we go. Now the final one, as I said, it's a bit of a shame he comes last, but it's nothing to do with who he is as an artist, really, apart from the fact that he's just so prolific, and he strikes me as being somebody who he just literally hasn't stopped. The lack of record sales, you know, hasn't affected him in terms of his rate of work. He just keeps on pumping out records, and it's Graham Parker, a bit like Joe Jackson, came on the scene in the late 1970s. Him, Costello, Joe Jackson, they were sort of a trio in a way. Graham Parker, quite a gruff, soulful singer-songwriter, probably more soulful than Elvis Costello, but in the same ballpark in terms of the attitude and that slightly sort of grizzled, actually more grizzled than Costello. Costello had that angry young man thing. Graham Parker was a little bit older, I think, and he didn't quite get the youth vote maybe quite as much as Costello, but he still did pretty good for a while. So his first album didn't really chart. It was the third album, Stick to Me, not this one. Stick to Me got to number 35 in the UK. And then this is his classic album, which came out in 1979, was his biggest success. Got to 22 in the UK and number 40 in the US. So that was pretty good. Then he had one more reasonable album, The Up Escalator, 36 in the UK and 40 in the US. And then it's off the cliff then. Another grey area, 98 in the UK, 52 in the US, And then I've actually got this one. This is the final one I've got to show here. This is his album from 1983, The Real McCook. Which is not a bad album, actually, not at all. It's pretty good. Got to 57 UK and number 50 in the US in 1983. So that seems to be the last of his records that had any significant chart action. So I'm trying to avoid the light. And then I suppose he wins the award then. He makes another 18 albums with no chart action whatsoever. So that's what I call determination. So yeah, Graham Parker, who'd have thought it? What can I say about this topic? It's just the nature of the beast, isn't it? Who'd be a pop artist? Who'd be in that business? So cutthroat. The public will just turn on a dime. You know, the new sound comes in, the new generation comes in, and all of a sudden you stop selling records, and that's the end of you commercially. But what unites, I think, pretty much all these artists, that they didn't really let it stop them. None of them vanished into the wilderness. They all either made a comeback later on, like the Boomtown Rats, or there's artists like Tanita Tikaram and Graham Parker who just keep churning out the records to their fan base, and perhaps that's enough for them, you know. But it's a bit of a melancholy theme, really. But I thought I would do it, so hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if I've missed anybody. As I said, Nick Kershaw is the obvious one. And I'm sure there's a few more. I've just looked at British artists, I think, mainly. There's quite a few American ones that I can think of. I thought I confine it to the Brits. So, yeah, that'll do for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back soon. Take care. Bye for now.